afternoon. Yvonne Stewart here with you today in our study on why should I give? And we're answering this question from the Bible. We want to see what God has to say about it. Here's part 8. I spoke before about not spending all of your money. After much study, we know that we should tithe. We also know we should give offerings. Today's topic relates to offerings. Anything you give over and above your tithe is an offering, and we can actually call it a seed. So the second reason why we should give is some of what you have is seed, not bread. The reason we sow seed is to invite God to give to us. Remember, we discussed that everything belongs to the Lord, and everything we have comes from the Lord. With that in mind, we can look at a couple of scriptures that show how we are to give seed. Notice the proper thing to do with seed is to sow it or to plant it. In Genesis 47, it says, Joseph announced to the people, "Here's how things stand. I've bought you and your land for Pharaoh. In exchange, I'm giving you seed so you can plant the ground. When the crops are harvested, you must give a fifth to Pharaoh and keep 4/5 to yourself for seed for your families and yourselves. You're going to be able to feed your children." And then in 2 Corinthians 9:10, it says, "For God is the one who provides seed for the farmer and then bread to eat. In the same way, he will provide and increase your resources and then produce a great harvest of generosity in you." Joseph is a type and shadow of Jesus as a deliverer and a kingdom builder. These verses show us that some of what we have is seed, not bread. And God, the kingdom builder, is the one giving the seed. Bread is for eating, but seeds are for planting. Which one comes first? Look back at 2 Corinthians 9:10. First you plant the seed, and then you get bread to eat. Can a farmer who eats his seed expect to get a harvest? Of course not. The next winter, his family is going to get very hungry because they have no bread. Bread only comes from a harvest of seeds planted. Harvest produces food and more seed. Godly seed also produces a harvest of generosity, not just more stuff. In other words, God wants us not to just eat more, but give more. Unfortunately, you cannot plant a dollar bill in the ground and expect dollar bills to come poking out of the ground to harvest. That's where giving comes in. We can give in all the ways that we've mentioned in the last 2 videos, and God will bring the harvest into our lives. Once we get the harvest, the process starts all over again. Tithe from the first and the best of the increase. And then use some of the harvest as seed, which is giving. Then use the rest of your bread for your daily needs. What happens when you plant a seed? Something after its kind grows. Some seeds, when they grow, produce only one or a few after its kind. Other seeds produce many multiples of its kind. In the kingdom of God, it is proper for good seeds planted in good ground to multiply many times over. In Mark 4:8, Jesus said, "Still other seeds fell on fertile soil, and they sprouted, grew, and produced a crop that was 30, 60, and even 100 times as much as had been planted." How much increase can you expect from your seed? It depends on a number of factors. In the natural, increase is determined by the type of seed that's sown. Different seeds produce different types of harvest. There are many types of trees in my own yard. The apple tree can produce 1,000 apples in one season, but the papaya tree only produces about a dozen at a time. On the other hand, it takes years for the apple tree to start producing after being planted, but the papaya tree began producing after less than a year. Different seeds produce different harvests. God doesn't make all seed the same because we need different harvests for different areas and times of our lives. Sometimes we need a little bit fast. Other times we can be patient to wait a longer time for a large harvest. When Luke retold Jesus' parable about the farmer scattering seed, he described the harvest as coming from seed sown on good ground as huge. I believe that is the spirit of harvest that the Lord wants to give. So I always believe God for the best possible harvest. He alone knows what that might be for any given seed and season. One thing is for certain regarding a harvest. Galatians 6:7 says, whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. That's in the New King James. The Amplified says, for whatever a man sows, that and only that is what he will reap. And the NLT says, you will always harvest what you plant. It is impossible for me to get apple trees or apples from my papaya trees. Once I planted a lime seedling. Why? Because I wanted limes. I never once thought I might get guava from that lime tree. I have a guava tree to get guavas. The natural, physical, earthly working of seeds reflects the spiritual working of seeds. Whatever we plant is what we will harvest. How can you harvest what you desire? Or how can you get the harvest you desire? Plant those kinds of seeds. For instance, do you need a house? Pay someone else's mortgage this month. Do you need food? Invite the neighborhood kids over for a snack. Do you need a vehicle? The next time someone gives you a ride, give them some money for gas or help with their car payment. Realize a bigger harvest requires a bigger seed or a larger amount of seed. I believe you can sow for spiritual things too with what you have in the natural. Once King David had gotten himself in trouble. As a punishment for his sin, God sent a plague on the nation. But God gave David a way out of that plague. He instructed David to give an offering, and it worked. 2 Samuel 24:25 says, David built an altar to the Lord and sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings. And the Lord answered his prayer for the land, and the plague on Israel was stopped. The next time you need a breakthrough in some area of your life, sow a seed to the Lord. Another way we can be involved in our harvest is to take care not only for what we sow, but how we sow. It makes a big difference in our harvest. 2 Corinthians 9:6 says, remember this, a farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. This key goes along with what we already discussed about proportionate giving. An amount that is generous to one person may be practically nothing to a different person. The spirit of generosity is a matter of the heart. It's a matter of the heart in the fact that how much you give means percentage, not dollar amount. Generosity is also a matter of the heart determined by whether you really want to give or not. Even if what you give is a lot, if you are reluctant, then that is not the spirit of generosity. Proverbs 23:6 says, don't eat with people who are stingy. Don't desire their delicacies. They're always thinking about how much it costs. Eat and drink, they say, but they don't mean it. God knows your heart when you give. He sees whether you're giving because you have to or giving because you want to. So let me give you a few keys to sowing seed. 1, give with a purpose and on purpose. All of the scriptures in the Bible that highlight positive examples of people giving show them giving with a purpose. They're either giving to a church building fund, they're giving to the poor, they're blessing a traveling minister, they're sowing for a harvest. Whatever type or kind of giving is happening, there's always a purpose behind it. If there isn't a purpose, God says, don't give. There are two sides to the purpose coin. One is with a purpose and the other is on purpose. In other words, give to something definite. That is with a purpose. And you give because you decide you want to. That's on purpose. Number two, give expecting a harvest. When we give, we should never just throw our money in the offering container, pass along a financial blessing, that holy handshake, give to a needy person on the street, whatever, without knowing and expecting that you will receive a harvest. Of course, our giving should be born out of a heart of love for the Lord. And ultimately, our love for God is the root reason of why we give. But that doesn't mean there aren't a whole lot of other reasons to give, one of which is to reap a harvest. No farmer goes through all the work and effort of planting a seed and then forgets all about the fact that a harvest is coming. No, he is in fact planting with the expectation of a harvest. We already looked at the multiplication aspect of harvest. Here's a continuation of that in Luke 6:38. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. God's idea of a good harvest is good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. Does that sound good to you? Here's how that looks. Suppose you give to the Lord using a teaspoon. That's the measure or instrument of measurement you use to give. Then when harvest time comes around, God pulls out his heavenly teaspoon and starts loading you down with 30, 60, or 100 teaspoons of harvest. Suppose you use a cup to give. When harvest comes around, God gets out his measuring cup. Suppose you give by the dump truck load. When harvest time comes around, God gets a fleet of dump trucks to load up your blessing. Oh, and no matter which measuring instrument that you use, when God gives back, he packs it down, shakes it up, and keeps adding more until the measuring instrument is overflowing. Then he gives it to you. There's no getting out a knife and scraping off the top to make sure it's an even measure. With God, it's always about overflow. Number three, tell God what you're sowing. This key could also be sow in faith. When you sow, make up your mind why you're sowing and what you're sowing for. This goes back to purpose. Think back to the examples I gave earlier. Your pastor may call for a church building project. That's the Lord's house. If you have needs in your own house, then sow a seed with a prayer. Lord, I sow this seed purposefully for the building of your house and to receive a harvest of provision for my own needs, my light bill to be paid, my rent to be paid, etc. If you're bringing food to the church outreach program, do it with a faith-filled prayer. Lord, you know I don't have enough food, but in faith, I sow a seed of food to other needy people, and I trust you to provide for my own family. When you sow seeds in faith, expecting to receive a harvest, you will know when that harvest comes. It occurs to me, now this is my opinion, that we may have seeds in the ground that can't grow because they don't know what they are. Making a decision to be more purposeful with your giving and let the Lord know what you're sowing for will increase your harvest. Well, that's all for today. I hope you receive some revelation from God about how to sow seed that will grow and multiply. The scriptures I read or referenced in this video are written in the description, so I hope you'll check them out and do your own study on how and why to give. I'm going to see you next time on Monday at 12 Central Time. Have a blessed week.